5 years ago, I dumped a broke grad student for $250,000. Today, he walked into the executive suite as my new boss. On his first day, he wiped a disciplinary write-up off my HR record. On his second day, he transferred me directly to the CEO's office. On his third day, he stood in the middle of the open plan floor, looked me dead in the eye, and asked, "Are you currently in need of a boyfriend, Ms. Davis?" The whole office whispered that Harrison Cole was still desperately in love with me. Only I knew how much he hated me. After all, 5 years ago, at the absolute lowest point of his life, I broke up with him, turned around, and got into another man's car. But his pursuit felt so painfully real. He remembered that I couldn't drink ice water. He knew my right knee ached when it rained. He systematically fired or relocated every middle manager who had ever made my life difficult. Slowly, against my better judgment, I started to believe that maybe he had actually forgiven me. That is, until the company's winter gala. I was walking past the VIP lounge when I heard Declan Pierce ask him, "You're about to announce your engagement to Audrey Kensington. Why are you still messing around with Sloane?" Through the cracked door, I saw Harrison casually swirling the amber liquid in his glass. 5 years ago, it only took $250,000 for her to sell me out, he said, his voice smooth and detached. I have more money than God now. Keeping her on the payroll for a few years is nothing to me. Declan frowned. And what if she takes it seriously? What if she begs you to marry her? Harrison let out a low, breathless laugh. Then I'll let her get on her knees and beg. He took a sip of his drink. And when she's done begging, I'll remind her that you can buy a mistress, but you have to earn the title of Mrs. Cole. I stood frozen in the hallway, my hand gripping the small velvet box in my pocket. I slowly let go, letting the silver cufflinks fall back into the darkness of my coat. So this was it. He hadn't spent 5 years climbing his way back to me for a second chance. He had done it to avenge a betrayal that never actually happened. Because 5 years ago, I never touched a single cent of that $250,000. From inside the lounge, the sharp clink of ice against crystal echoed through the silence. Declan was quiet for a long time. Did you ever think that maybe she had a reason? That she was backed into a corner? She took the buyout, she dumped me, and she got into someone else's Mercedes. Harrison's tone was ice. What other reason do I need? He set his glass down. Besides, isn't she enjoying it? The promotion, the gifts, the envy of everyone in the office. I've given her everything she wants. Letting her believe she's actually going to marry me before I strip it all away. That's what I call justice. My fingernails bit into the palms of my hands. The small box in my pocket felt heavy, bruising my hip. 2 standard silver cufflinks. It had taken me a month to pick them out. On the back, custom engraved, were the letters S and H, Sloane and Harrison. I had planned to give them to him tonight. Because just a few hours ago, he had pinned me against the railing of an empty terrace, the winter wind whipping around us, and asked if I was ready to start over. Before I could even answer, he had dipped his head and kissed me. And in that brief, suspended moment, I truly believed the last 5 years of heartbreak could be undone. The sharp click of heels on marble snapped me out of my thoughts. Sloane. I turned. Audrey Kensington stood there in a floor-length crimson gown. Her gaze flicked from my face to the cracked door of the lounge, then drifted down to the edge of the velvet box poking out of my coat pocket. A gift for Harrison? She didn't wait for my permission. She reached out and pulled the box from my pocket, snapping it open. Seeing the engraved initials, her lips curled into a perfectly polite, entirely devastating smile. It's the thought that counts, I suppose. A bit pedestrian though, don't you think? She snapped the box shut. The blue diamond ones he's wearing tonight? I gave him those last month. Nothing crazy. 7 figures. She pressed the box back into my hand. But a gift is a gift. Go ahead and take it in, Sloane. I really don't mind. Right on cue, the lounge door swung open. Harrison stood in the frame. When he saw me, his eyes hitched for a fraction of a second. What are you doing out here? Looking for the restroom, I said. Took a wrong turn. He studied my face for a long moment, then looked away. Audrey slid seamlessly to his side, looping her arm through his. Harrison, your mother is texting me. She says she's narrowed the engagement venues down to 3, and we absolutely have to pick one tonight. We'll deal with it tomorrow. Harrison didn't pull his arm away, but his eyes were back on me. What's in your hand? I pushed the box deep into my pocket. Just something a friend asked me to hold on to. A faint crease appeared between his brows. Audrey laughed, a light, musical sound. Oh, it wasn't for Harrison. I told her as much. He'd never wear something so basic. She reached up, intimately adjusting his tie. Let's go. Your parents are waiting. I stared at the massive diamond already sitting on Audrey's ring finger. Over the last month, Harrison hadn't mentioned a word about an arranged marriage. I had been stupid enough to think Audrey was just a family friend his mother kept pushing on him. But they were already looking at venues. Sloane. Harrison's voice cut through the air. I looked up. He slipped off his suit jacket and draped it over my shoulders. Your hands are freezing. You need to dress warmer. The smile on Audrey's face fractured. Harrison acted like he didn't notice. He took my hands in his, using his body heat to warm my skin. The gesture was so innate, so familiar. It felt like we had never been apart. They have the AC blasting in here, he murmured. Keep this on. Aren't you supposed to take Audrey home? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She has a driver. Audrey's face flushed tight. Harrison, your mother said tonight. I said tomorrow. He cut her off, pulling the lapels of his jacket tighter across my chest. Don't wander off. Wait for me in the ballroom. So gentle. If I hadn't stood outside that door 5 minutes ago, I would have been thrilled by the favoritism. I would have thought he was choosing me over the woman he was supposed to marry. But I knew the script now. When I got back to my table in the ballroom, my phone lit up. Liam had texted, saying he was parked downstairs. Gemma, the junior coordinator sitting next to me, saw the name flash on my screen and nudged me. A guy picking you up this late? Gotta be a boyfriend. Across the table, Harrison froze, his wine glass halfway to his mouth. He recognized Liam's name. 5 years ago, Liam was the man who had picked me up in the pouring rain. A VP down the table laughed. Careful, Mr. Cole. Looks like you've got some competition. Aren't you going to intervene? Harrison stared at my phone, the warmth bleeding completely out of his eyes. Why would I? He said, leaning back in his chair. His tone was utterly bored. Ms. Davis is just an employee. A heavy, awkward silence fell over the table. Audrey smirked, taking a delicate sip of her champagne. Let's not make inappropriate jokes, everyone. Harrison takes care of Sloane out of a sense of nostalgia. You look out for an ex when they're struggling. But it's not like you'd actually bring them home to meet the family. The executive shifted uncomfortably. I stood up, sliding Harrison's jacket off my shoulders and draping it neatly over the back of my chair. Audrey is right, I said. Harrison's head snapped toward me. I picked up my clutch, gave him a polite, hollow nod and said, Good night, Mr. Cole. It was snowing outside. Liam was waiting at the bottom of the hotel steps with an umbrella. The moment he saw me, he unwrapped his wool scarf and looped it around my neck. Why are your eyes red? He asked, frowning. I had some wine. You don't drink. He took my bag and opened the passenger door. Before I ducked inside, I glanced back. Harrison was standing under the awning of the hotel entrance. He was bathed in the harsh yellow light, his eyes locked violently onto Liam's hand resting on my shoulder. Liam lowered his voice. Do you want me to go over there and explain? No. 5 years ago, I had tried to explain. He hadn't believed a single word. When I got home, I dropped the velvet box into a manila envelope. Then I opened my laptop and logged into the corporate Workday portal. I stared at the blank screen for a few seconds, taking a slow breath, before typing my name at the bottom of the resignation form. Audrey showed up at the office the next morning carrying a designer-insulated tote. Security didn't stop her. She breezed right into the executive suite, dropping her Birkin on the sofa in Harrison's office. Harrison, your mother had the chef make your favorite bisque. Harrison was in the middle of a Zoom call. He gave a non-committal hum. But Audrey didn't leave. She shrugged off her coat, walked out to my desk, and sat in the guest chair. Sloane, be a dear and fetch me some bowls. I gestured politely toward the break room. The dishware is in the cabinets on the right, Audrey. Feel free. She arched a perfectly groomed eyebrow. I am a guest. You are administrative staff. Is client hospitality not in your job description? Out on the floor, heads began to turn. Harrison ended his call and pushed open his glass door. I thought he was going to intervene. Instead, he leaned against the doorframe, sweeping a cold glance over both of us. Get her the bowls, Sloane. A sharp, phantom pain flared in my chest. I lowered my eyes. Right away. I went to the kitchenette, retrieved the bowls, and poured the soup exactly as Audrey instructed. She picked up a spoon, blew softly on the steam, and held it up to Harrison's mouth. Your mom made it from scratch. Try it. Harrison didn't open his mouth. His eyes bypassed her completely, landing heavily on my face. Audrey didn't seem to care. By the way, I think we should just book the Pierre for the engagement party. She pulled 3 glossy venue brochures from her bag and slid them across my desk. You're in logistics, Sloane. You're good at this stuff. Look these over and tell us which one makes the most sense. The entire floor went dead silent. Everyone in this building knew Harrison had been aggressively pursuing me for a month. And now his fiancée was making me plan their engagement party. Gemma couldn't take it. She leaned over her cubicle. Miss Kensington, I don't think that's appropriate. What's not appropriate? Audrey smiled, all teeth. Sloane is someone Harrison trusts. I wouldn't feel comfortable leaving this in anyone else's hands. I picked up the brochures. I flipped through them, my face perfectly blank. The Pierre has a higher ceiling in the grand ballroom, and it's closer to the Cole family estate. It's the most logical choice. Audrey clapped her hands together. See? I told you she was sensible. Harrison's face turned into thunder. The second Audrey left, he called me into his office. The door had barely clicked shut before he snatched the venue brochures out of my hand and slammed them onto his desk. Who gave you permission to pick a venue for her? Audrey did. And whatever she tells you to do, you just do it? It's my job. Harrison stepped into my space. Are you seriously going to stand here and pretend you don't care? I looked up at him. Am I supposed to care? Liam picked you up last night, and today you're planning my engagement party. He grabbed my wrist, backing me up until the edge of his mahogany desk dug into my spine. What the hell am I to you, Sloan? I almost laughed. He sat there and let Audrey humiliate me in front of the entire company, and now he was furious that I wasn't fighting for him. What do you want me to do, Harrison? Rip her hair out in the middle of the bullpen and claim you as mine? He flinched. I looked at him, my voice completely hollow. Under what title would I be claiming you? Silence suffocated the room. Harrison slowly let go of my wrist. He opened his top drawer and pulled out a silver key. Attached to it was a small keychain engraved with the letter S. My penthouse in Tribeca, he said, pressing the key into my palm. I had the master closet cleared out for you. You can move in tonight. 5 years ago, we had lived in a cramped 200-square-foot studio in Brooklyn. He had given me the only closet. His clothes stayed in a duffel bag under the bed. I remembered him holding me in the dark, promising that one day, when he made it, he would give me a walk-in closet the size of a living room. The promise had come true, but all I felt was a bone-deep chill. Audrey is a strategic choice for a wife, he said, folding my fingers over the key. He spoke like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. But that doesn't change anything between us. I stared at him numb. Thinking I didn't understand, he softened his voice, as if explaining something to a child. She wants the title of Mrs. Cole. You want me. The two things don't conflict. The last, pathetic shred of hope I hadn't realized I was still holding on to shattered completely. In his mind, because I had once taken money to leave him, I was now only worthy of living in the shadows. He would give me real estate. He would give me unlimited credit. He would give me his twisted version of tenderness. The only thing he would never give me was respect. Do you understand? He asked softly. I nodded. I understand. Harrison looked relieved. He reached out and smoothed a hand over my hair. Wait for me tonight. We'll get dinner. I took the key and walked back to my desk. An alert popped up on my screen. It was the HR director. Sloan, your resignation requires approval from your direct supervisor. I glanced through the glass at the man in the office. He was sipping the lukewarm water I had brought him that morning. I'm still in my probationary transfer period. I typed back. Route it through internal compliance bypass. But Mr. Cole personally transferred you. If he finds out, keep it quiet for now. The typing bubble hovered for a long time. Bypass takes 3 business days. That's fine. I closed the chat and dropped the penthouse key into the manila envelope. Right before 5 o'clock, Harrison's phone rang. Audrey had rear-ended someone in a parking garage and was sobbing hysterically, demanding he come. He grabbed his coat and stopped by my desk. We'll do dinner another night. Okay. He hesitated. You're not going to ask where I'm going? I didn't look up from my monitor. Audrey needs you. Harrison's jaw tightened. From the phone still clutched in his hand, Audrey's wailing drifted through the air. Harrison, my neck hurts so much, where are you? He stared at me for 3 agonizing seconds, then turned and walked out. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window. Down on the street level, I watched him emerge from the building. Audrey practically threw herself out of a cab and into his arms. He didn't hug her back. But he didn't push her away either. The next morning, corporate panicked. A massive institutional client pushed their visit up by 2 days, and the VP of operations had just been rushed to the ER with a ruptured appendix. The entire administrative floor was in chaos. I spent the next 14 hours rerouting town cars, renegotiating block rates at the Four Seasons, and dragging Gemma through every item on the itinerary. At 11 p.m., Audrey strolled into the office carrying a garment bag. She dropped it directly onto my keyboard. Sloan, take this into Harrison. He needs to change. Gemma snapped. Ms. Kensington, Sloan is the director of operations, not a personal valet. Is there a difference? Audrey looked me up and down, a cruel little laugh escaping her throat. Harrison brought her up here to fetch things, didn't he? I put a hand on Gemma's arm, stopping her. I'll take it. I walked into Harrison's office. He was rubbing his temples, having just finished a brutal conference call. When he saw the garment bag, his face darkened. Who sent that? Audrey. Throw it out. I don't have time tonight. I laid the suit across the leather sofa. The prep for the client visit is done. You're free to leave, Mr. Cole. His eyes snapped to mine. Are you kicking me out? Your fiancé is waiting. The door flew open. Audrey strutted in and immediately locked her arm around his. Harrison, even Sloan is telling you to go. What are you dragging your feet for? She turned to me. You know, Sloan, you're a lot more pragmatic than I gave you credit for. She smiled sweetly. Men like to play with shiny new toys, but when it's time to settle down, Pedigree matters. Just because Harrison is keeping you entertained right now doesn't mean you'll ever step foot inside the Cole family home. Enough. Harrison's voice cracked like a whip. I looked up. He had pulled his arm out of Audrey's grip, his expression lethal. Keep that garbage out of the office, Audrey. He wasn't mad that she said it. He was just mad she said it at work. Audrey looked at me like she had just won a war. I nodded slowly. Audrey is absolutely right. Who you marry has nothing to do with me. Harrison's face went bone white. Say that again. It's late. Have a good night, both of you. I gathered my clipboards and tried to walk past him, but Harrison reached out and clamped his hand around my wrist. I told you, Audrey does not affect your position, he hissed, his voice dropping low, sounding exactly like a man trying to placate a hysterical mistress. Just stay in your lane. Don't try to compete with her, and she won't make your life difficult. Audrey laughed from the doorway. Hear that, Sloan? Harrison hates women who don't know their place. I looked down at Harrison's fingers wrapped around my arm. Okay, I said. I won't compete. His grip loosened for a fraction of a second. I didn't know why, but even though I had given him exactly the answer he wanted, he looked sicker than before. By 1 a.m., the itinerary was locked. Gemma sat at my desk, flipping through the handover binder I had just printed. Her eyes started to water. Sloan, are you sure you're just taking PTO? Why do you ask? This is insane. She pointed at a page. You wrote down the exact pharmacy to call when his ulcer acts up. You noted that he can't handle morning meetings if he hasn't slept. You even documented the exact temperature he likes his water. I closed the binder. I'm transitioning my duties. It needs to be thorough. But you're the only one he trusts. I smiled faintly. Not for much longer. My phone buzzed on the desk. An email from HR. Compliance bypass approved. Physical paperwork filed. I swiped the notification away and clipped my corporate ID back onto my lanyard. The client visit wrapped up successfully the next afternoon. When Harrison returned to the office, he was holding a white paper box tied with string. Canellas from a French bakery across the bridge in Brooklyn. The place was an hour out of his way. Years ago, I had mentioned them in passing once. He had remembered. About last night. Don't be mad, he said, setting the box on my desk. I'm not mad. Liar. Harrison reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a long, rectangular velvet box. Inside lay a delicate silver necklace with a crescent moon pendant. 5 years ago, our studio apartment hadn't even had a fire escape. In the dead of summer, when the heat was suffocating, we would sit on the roof eating instant ramen. I had pointed at the moon and told him that one day, I wanted an apartment high enough to look the sky in the eye. He had held me from behind, swearing to God he'd buy me a penthouse in the clouds. He hadn't forgotten a thing. Harrison unclasped the chain and fastened it around my neck. The cold silver rested heavy against my collarbone. Do you like it? I love it. Then don't take it off. He leaned down, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to my forehead. I booked a table for tomorrow night. 7 o'clock. What's the occasion? It's time we set the ground rules. He trailed his thumb over the moon pendant, his eyes full of smug certainty. From now on, Audrey is Audrey and you are you. As long as you're a good girl, you'll never want for anything. I looked at him. What exactly does that mean? I'll transfer the deed of the Tribeca place to your name. I'll get you a black card, he said effortlessly, tossing out life-changing wealth like it was loose change. Buy whatever you want. The girl who had supposedly been bought off for $250,000 could surely be bought again for millions more. It made perfect sense to him. I smiled, a quiet, broken thing. Okay. He pulled me into a deep hug. Good girl. I rested my cheek against his chest, listening to the steady, familiar beat of his heart. Tomorrow night, I said calmly. I have something to give you too. Harrison glanced at the drawer of my desk. The cufflinks. You'll see. Thinking I had finally accepted my role as his kept woman, he practically beamed, ruffling my hair. I can't wait. The second he was gone, I unclasped the moon necklace. I dropped it into the manila envelope, right next to the apartment key and the cufflinks. Early the next morning, Audrey marched into the office with a team of luxury wedding planners trailing behind her. She slammed 3 massive leather-bound binders onto my desk. Sloan, the Pierre only has 2 weekends available next month. Look at the calendars and pick a date for us. The bullpen fell dead quiet. People exchanged horrified looks. Is he seriously getting married? Someone whispered. Audrey stroked the diamond on her finger, glowing with triumph. Our parents have already signed the preliminary contracts. What do you think? Harrison stepped out of his office right at that moment. Every eye in the room darted toward him. He didn't deny it. He just flipped open the top binder, glanced at it, and tossed it back onto my desk. You have good taste, Sloan. Pick a date for her. Just last night, he had held me in his arms and promised I'd never want for anything. Today, he was making me select his wedding date. Audrey leaned over my desk. So Sloan, what day works best? I opened the calendar. The 28th. Why? The almanac says it's an auspicious day for a wedding. She laughed, utterly delighted. Perfect. We'll do the 28th. You should come, Sloan. You and Harrison have history. You're practically an old friend. I closed the binder. If I'm still at the company by then, I wouldn't miss it. Harrison let out a sharp, dismissive sigh. Stop throwing a tantrum. He clearly thought I was just acting out of jealousy. As he turned to leave, he leaned down, his mouth brushing my ear. Don't be late tonight. I'll give you everything you've been asking for. I looked at him, the corners of my mouth curving up. I won't disappoint you, Mr. Cole. I ran my final meetings before noon. By 1 p.m., I transferred all my administrative access to Gemma. At 5 p.m., HR brought me my physical exit paperwork. Are you sure you don't want to wait for Mr. Cole to get back? The HR rep asked nervously. If he sees this, he's never going to sign off. That was exactly why I wasn't waiting. I signed the bottom line. I handed over my corporate card and my building badge. After 5 years at this company, I had surprisingly little to take with me. A ceramic mug, a bottle of ibuprofen, and a gray wool scarf my mother had knitted for me. I put them in a small cardboard box. Before I left, I walked into Harrison's empty office. On his desk, his calendar had a thick red circle around 7 p.m. Next to it, he had written one word. Sloan. I stared at it for a long time. Then I opened the second drawer on the left side of his desk. It was where he usually kept his ulcer medication. I placed the thick manila envelope inside and shut the drawer. At 7 p.m., Harrison was sitting at a window table in one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants. On the table in front of him sat the deed to the Tribeca penthouse, an American Express Centurion card, and a velvet box containing a diamond tennis bracelet. Declan, sitting across from him, checked his watch. She's late. She's doing it on purpose. Harrison leaned back, swirling his bourbon, radiating confidence. Audrey came into the office today. Sloan is just making me sweat. She wants me to coax her. By 7:30, the chair across from him was still empty. You want to call her? Declan asked. Let her throw her fit. Harrison took a slow sip of his drink. She swallowed her pride for a month just waiting for me to make this official. When she's done being mad, she'll walk through that door. At 8 p.m., the private dining room door swung open. It wasn't me. It was Audrey. She tossed the engagement planner onto the table. The 28th. Sloan picked it out herself. Harrison glanced at the date, a smirk playing on his lips. She picked it to piss me off. What are you talking about? She's jealous. Audrey's face twisted in disgust. You really think you're God's gift to women, don't you? She took the money and ran 5 years ago. Now she's just holding out because you haven't offered her enough. Harrison's eyes went cold. I'm offering her a hell of a lot more than 250 grand. Right. Audrey let out a vicious, mocking laugh. God, she acted so high and mighty back then, refusing to take the envelope to her face. But the second your mom's assistant dropped the trust account card at her apartment, she was gone by morning. Harrison froze, the glass halting halfway to his mouth. She didn't take the card from my mother? Realizing she had slipped up, Audrey looked away. What difference does it make? She got the card, and she dumped you. Who knows what she spent it on? Harrison slammed his glass down. He pulled out his phone and dialed his private wealth manager. Pull the records on the escrow account my mother opened 5 years ago under Sloan Davis's name. His voice was eerily calm, the voice of a man securing the final piece of evidence needed to destroy an opponent. I want a line-by-item breakdown of every transaction. He hung up and looked at his watch. She left my gift at the office. Audrey frowned. You're going back there now? I'll be right back. Harrison walked into the empty executive suite. He went straight to his desk and pulled open the second drawer on the left. The manila envelope was exactly where I had left it. He pulled it out, a triumphant smile touching his lips. Told you she cared. His phone rang. He pinned the phone between his ear and his shoulder, tearing open the envelope. The wealth manager's voice came through the speaker, crisp and professional. Mr. Cole, I've reviewed the ledger. The initial deposit of $250,000 has never been touched. No withdrawals, no transfers, no card authorizations. For 5 years, the account has been completely dormant. At that exact moment, Harrison tipped the envelope upside down. The silver key to the penthouse hit the mahogany desk. Then the silver moon necklace. Then the 2 cufflinks engraved with S and H. And finally, a single sheet of paper slid out. It was a fully executed, HR-approved resignation form. The timestamp on the electronic signature was from the night of the winter gala. Hours after he had told Declan he wanted to see me beg. The silence in the executive suite was absolute, heavy enough to crush bone. Harrison stood under the harsh fluorescent downlights of his office, his breath hitching in his throat. The mobile phone remained pinned against his ear, the wealth manager's voice buzzing faintly through the receiver like static from another lifetime. The initial deposit of $250,000 has never been touched. For 5 years, the account has been completely dormant. Harrison's fingers trembled. His grip on the device faltered, and the phone slipped from his palm, tumbling against the thick wool rug with a muffled thud. He didn't bend to pick it up. His eyes were locked on the items scattered across the polished mahogany of his desk. The silver key to the Tribeca penthouse. The silver crescent moon necklace, its delicate chain coiled like a dormant snake. The 2 custom-engraved cufflinks, catching the sterile white light, S&H. And beneath them, the stark, white resignation form, bearing the crisp electronic timestamp from the night of the winter gala. Hours before he had draped his jacket over her shivering shoulders, hours before he had pulled her against him and promised she would never want for anything as his kept woman. She knew. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. A cold, violent tremor started at the base of his spine and radiated through his limbs. She had stood outside the VIP lounge. She had heard every wretched, arrogant word that had spilled past his lips. She had listened to him call her a transaction, listened to him tell Declan that he would make her get on her knees and beg before reminding her she could only ever be a mistress. And she hadn't screamed. She hadn't thrown a glass. She hadn't demanded an explanation. She had simply stood there, hidden the cufflinks in her coat, slipped his jacket off her shoulders and begun the quiet, methodical process of erasing herself from his life. "No," Harrison whispered, the sound scraping raw against his throat. "No, no, no." He lunged forward, snatching the cufflinks off the desk. He turned them over with frantic, clumsy fingers. The engraving was subtle, rendered in an elegant, sloping script. It had taken a month to make. He remembered the faint bags under her eyes 3 weeks ago, remembered how she had skipped lunches to run errands. During her break, he had assumed she was spending his money, indulging in the luxuries he believed had bought her back. She had been saving her own modest salary to buy him a gift for an anniversary. Only she remembered. "Sloan," he choked out, his voice cracking in the empty room. The glass door of the office swung open with a sharp click. Audrey stood in the entryway, her arms crossed over her designer cashmere coat, her lips pulled into an impatient sneer. "Harrison? Are you out of your mind? Our parents are still waiting at the restaurant. We have to finalize the seating chart for the Pierre, and you're standing here staring at." "Get out," Harrison said. Audrey blinked, startled. "What?" Harrison slowly lifted his head. The color had drained completely from his face, leaving behind a terrifying, hollow mask. His dark eyes, usually so calculated and sharp, were bloodshot and feral. "I said," he snarled, his voice dropping into a register that made the hairs on the back of Audrey's neck stand up. "Get the hell out of my office." Audrey's face flushed with indignant rage. "Excuse me? You don't speak to me like that. We are getting married in 4 weeks. My father's firm is currently underwriting your secondary expansion." "There is no wedding," Harrison said, his voice terrifyingly calm now as he walked around the desk, stopping mere inches from her. "There was never going to be a wedding. You were a business hedge. A prop." Audrey took a step back, her chest heaving. "You think you can just discard me? For her? For a common administrative girl who took your mother's money and ran?" "She never touched the money," Harrison whispered, stepping closer, his shadow engulfing her. "Not a single cent. For 5 years, it sat in an escrow account, while you and my mother whispered poison into my ear." Audrey froze. The smug superiority on her face fractured into genuine panic. "Harrison, listen to me. It doesn't matter if she spent it or not. She took the envelope. She walked away from you when you were nothing. She chose Liam over you." "Get out," Harrison repeated, his voice barely above a whisper, yet vibrating with an intensity that rattled the glass partitions of the executive floor. "If you or your family ever step foot on this property again, I will liquidate your father's debt positions by morning. Try me." Audrey stared at him, realized with sickening clarity that he meant every word, and turned on her heels, her stilettos clattering in frantic retreat down the marble corridor. Harrison didn't watch her leave. He snatched his coat, grabbed the cufflinks and the moon necklace from the desk, shoving them deep into his pocket, and sprinted for the elevators. The rain over the city had turned into a punishing sleet by the time Harrison's Maybach screeched to a halt outside a dilapidated 4-story walk-up in Greenpoint. This was the building. 5 years ago, they had lived on the top floor. The radiator had clanked like a dying machine all winter, the water pressure had been a joke, and the roof had leaked whenever the rain blew from the east. But on Friday nights, when he was running on 3 hours of sleep and surviving on instant coffee while writing his doctoral thesis, Sloan would sit on the worn linoleum floor between his knees, massaging his temples with lavender oil she bought from the street market. "You're going to build an empire, Harry," she had whispered into his hair back. Then, her voice full of an unshakable, blind faith that had terrified and sustained him. "And when you do, I'll be right there, making sure you remember to eat your dinner." Harrison slammed the car door shut, not bothering with an umbrella. The freezing sleet soaked through his bespoke wool coat within seconds, plastering his dark hair to his forehead as he took the concrete front steps 3 at a time. He punched the buzzer for 4B. Silence. He buzzed again, holding the button down until the plastic casing creaked under the pressure of his thumb. Nothing. A tenant coming down the stairs to take out the trash pushed the exterior security door open. Harrison caught the heavy metal frame before it could latch, slipping past the startled older man without a word of apology. He took the flights of stairs at a run, his breath tearing through his lungs in ragged, burning gasps. When he reached the 4th-floor landing, he stopped dead. The door to Unit 4B was standing slightly ajar. A strip of blue painter's tape was stuck to the center panel, bearing 3 words written in a super's handwriting. Unit vacant/painting. Harrison pushed the door open. The smell of fresh, chemical latex paint hit his nose. The apartment was entirely empty. The small sofa they had hauled up 4 flights of stairs together 5 years ago, the one she had insisted on keeping even after he offered to buy her a brownstone, was gone. The tiny kitchen counter where she had left him handwritten notes about his vitamins was bare, scrubbed down with bleach. In the center of the hardwood floor sat a single cardboard box. Harrison walked toward it like a condemned man walking toward the gallows. His legs felt like lead. He dropped to his knees on the cold, dusty floorboards, his tailored trousers soaking up the dampness of the room. Inside the box were the relics of his past. The cheap plastic alarm clock they had shared in grad school. A framed photograph of the two of them at Coney Island, taken with a disposable camera. His 24-year-old self had an arm thrown around her shoulders, grinning wildly at the lens, while Sloane laughed, her hair whipped across her face by the Atlantic breeze. And at the bottom of the box, tucked beneath an old wool sweater he had left behind 5 years ago, lay an ivory envelope. It was addressed to him in his mother's sharp, aristocratic calligraphy. Harrison's hands shook violently as he pulled out the folded sheet of heavy cream stationery. The date on the letter was November 14th, 5 years ago to the day. "Miss Davis, let us not pretend you belong in my son's future. Harrison has been offered the venture backing from the Kensington Syndicate to launch his logistics software. That capital is conditional upon his complete social and domestic freedom. If you remain by his side, the offer will be rescinded. His academic credentials will be challenged by the Board of Trustees, and the debt he accrued during his patent filing will fall entirely on his shoulders. He will be ruined before he begins. Take the enclosed credit line. Pack your things. Leave cleanly. If you tell him about this conversation, I will ensure the Kensington firm sues him for intellectual property infringement using the non-disclosure agreements he signed last summer. Be smart, Sloane. If you truly love him, you will get out of his way." Harrison stared at the paper. The ink seemed to bleed before his eyes, blurring into a sickening haze. The memory of that rainy night 5 years ago slammed into him like a freight train. He had come home from his lab, exhausted, triumphant, holding the printout of his successful prototype test. He had found her packing a single suitcase. He had begged. He had fallen to his knees right on these very floorboards, crying, asking what he had done wrong, asking if his poverty had finally broken her patience. And Sloane, her face pale as marble, her eyes dead and dry, had looked down at him and said, "I'm tired of living on instant noodles, Harrison. Your mother gave me a way out. I'm taking it." Then she had walked down the stairs, stepped into Liam's car in the pouring rain, and never looked back. She hadn't abandoned him for money. She had ripped her own heart out through her ribs to protect his intellectual property, his startup funding, and his future from his own mother's ruthless ambitions. She had played the villain in his story for 5 years so he could become the man he was today. And when he had finally clawed his way to the top of the world, when he had accumulated enough wealth and power to shield her from every storm on earth, he had used that power to drag her back into his orbit just to torment her. He had treated her like a prostitute. He had made her serve soup to the daughter of the woman who had blackmailed her. He had forced her to plan the wedding of the man she had sacrificed her entire youth to build. A dry, strangled sound escaped Harrison's chest. He doubled over on the dusty floorboards of the empty apartment, clutching the letter against his heart. His forehead pressed against the cold wood as a wave of violent, suffocating sobs tore through his body. "What have I done?" He wept into the dark. "God, what have I done to you?" By 8 a.m. the following morning, the executive boardroom on the 50th floor of Cole Enterprises resembled a war zone. Eleanor Cole, immaculate in a bespoke gray Chanel suit, sat at the head of the marble conference table, flanked by 3 senior legal partners and the chief operating officer. "You've lost your mind, Harrison," Eleanor said, her voice icy though a trace of panic flickered in her eyes as she looked at her son. Harrison had not slept. He had not changed his clothes. The dampness from the previous night's sleet had dried into his wool coat, his white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the throat, and the dark stubble on his jaw made him look 10 years older. But it was his eyes that terrified the room, sunken, bloodshot, and burning with a lethal, terrifying clarity. On the table in front of Eleanor lay a 300-page forensic audit bound in black leather. Item 1, Harrison said, his voice entirely flat, devoid of human inflection. The Kensington Syndicate's equity stake in our logistics subsidiary has been bought out at par value under the antitrust trigger clause in Section 14. Audrey's father signed the transfer 40 minutes ago after I informed him that our international division was prepared to drop their shipping volume by 90%. Eleanor's hand clenched around her gold pen. You crippled our primary maritime partner over a domestic spat. Item 2, Harrison continued, not breaking his cadence. He tossed a smaller folder across the marble. It slid until it struck his mother's water glass with a sharp clink. Your administrative stipend from the family foundation is terminated. Your board seat on the cultural endowment is revoked. The townhome on the Upper East Side is titled under the corporate holding company. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. The legal partners shifted uncomfortably, staring at their tablets, refusing to meet Eleanor's frantic gaze. Harrison. Eleanor slammed her palm against the table, her aristocratic composure finally shattering into hysterical rage. I am your mother. Everything I did, everything, was to ensure you became the head of this dynasty. If I hadn't removed that little nobody from your life, you would still be rotting in a public university lab. Harrison slowly stood up. He leaned over the table, placing his palms flat against the cold stone, his gaze pinning her like an insect beneath a needle. That nobody gave up her entire life so I could keep my patents, he whispered, his voice vibrating with a venom so pure it made the lawyers in the room hold their breath. She protected my dreams from you while you were using them as a leash to choke me. Eleanor flinched. She took the card. She never touched a penny. It sat in an escrow account for 5 years while she lived in a walk-up, worked 12-hour shifts, and wore shoes with holes in the soles. Harrison's jaw clenched so hard the muscles jumped beneath his skin. You didn't build this dynasty, Mother. She did. With every piece of herself that she let you tear away. He straightened up, buttoning his coat with slow, deliberate precision. Where is she? He asked. I don't know. Eleanor spat, her chest heaving. Even if I did, I wouldn't tell you. Harrison looked down at her, his expression melting into a chilling, absolute indifference. You won't have to, he said quietly, because from this moment on you no longer exist in this company, or in my life. He turned and walked out of the boardroom. Declan was waiting in the outer corridor, holding a tablet and an unread cup of coffee. He fell into step beside Harrison, his expression grim. We ran her social security number, her banking logs, and her passport file. Declan said quietly as they stepped into the private executive elevator. Harrison's head snapped toward him. And nothing, Declan said, his voice dropping in sympathy. Her phone was disconnected at midnight. She closed her checking account this morning at 7:30 a.m. via a wire transfer to a blind trust in Delaware. Her name hasn't popped up on any domestic flight manifests, train registries, or rental leases. The elevator plummeted smoothly toward the ground floor. What about Liam? Harrison asked, his hands balling into fists inside his pockets, his knuckles brushing against the 2 silver cufflinks. Liam Pierce resigned from his firm 3 days ago, Declan replied. Sold his vehicle to a private dealership yesterday afternoon. Harrison, they didn't just leave town. They sanitized the trail. She planned this the moment she walked out of that gala. The elevator doors opened into the underground parking garage. Harrison stood in the cold, concrete expanse, the dim yellow light casting long, hollow shadows across his frame. The city above them was waking up, millions of people moving through the streets, rushing to their jobs, living their lives. And among those millions, the only person who had ever loved him without a price tag had vanished into thin air. Find her, Harrison said, his voice raw, shaking with an agony that tore straight from his ribcage. Hire every private intelligence firm in North America. Subpoena every telecom server. I don't care if it costs $50 million or $500 million. He turned to Declan, his eyes shining with unshed, burning tears. Find my wife. 8 months later. Chicago. The late autumn wind blowing off Lake Michigan carried the sharp, biting scent of early frost and wet concrete. On the 42nd floor of the newly constructed Apex Tower on Wacker Drive, the open-plan floor was alive with the disciplined, humming energy of a major operations hub. Sloan, the maritime customs clearance for the Rotterdam shipment just hit a bottleneck at the port of Montreal. A young logistics coordinator called out, jogging toward the corner office with a tablet in hand. Sloan Davis looked up from her dual monitor setup. She looked entirely different from the quiet, accommodating administrative assistant who had walked the halls of Cole Enterprises 8 months ago. Her hair was cut into a sleek, shoulder-length bob that highlighted the clean, elegant lines of her jaw. She wore a tailored ivory wool suit, a charcoal silk blouse unbuttoned slightly at the collar, and no jewelry save for a simple, minimalist titanium watch on her left wrist. There was no exhaustion in her posture, no nervous deference in her eyes. He moved with the crisp, effortless authority of an executive who had built an entire division from the ground up. Montreal implemented a new digital manifest protocol at midnight, Sloan said, calmly, taking the tablet and signing off on an electronic override with 2 quick swipes of her stylus. Route the bill of lading through our secondary customs broker in Halifax. They have pre-cleared bonded transport. The containers will be on the rail line to Detroit by 6 tonight. The coordinator grinned with relief. You're a lifesaver, Ms. Davis. I don't know how you keep all these municipal codes in your head. Experience, Sloan smiled, handing the tablet back. Make sure the client receives the tracking update before noon. As the coordinator hurried away, Liam walked into the office, carrying 2 cardboard cups of black coffee from the local roastery around the corner. He set one on her desk, dropping into the leather guest chair with a long, contented sigh. The third quarter revenue reports just finalized. Vanguard Logistics is officially operating in the black, 14 months ahead of our venture projections. Sloan took a sip of the hot coffee, the rich, bitter flavor warming her chest. That means we can authorize the employee bonus pool before Thanksgiving. Liam chuckled, shaking his head. You're the chief operating officer of the fastest growing freight tech firm in the Midwest, and your first thought is the junior staff's holiday bonuses. A company is only as reliable as the people who keep the servers running at 2 in the morning, Sloan replied, leaning back in her ergonomic chair looking out over the panoramic expanse of the Chicago skyline. From this height, the cars on the expressway below looked like tiny ribbons of light. It was high enough to look the sky in the eye. She had achieved the dream she had whispered to Harrison on a Brooklyn rooftop 5 years ago. But she hadn't needed his black cards, his Tribeca penthouse, or his permission to have it. She had built it with Liam, with her own sweat, with 70-hour workweeks and an unbreakable refusal to ever let another human being hold her dignity as collateral. Sloan, Liam said, his tone shifting from casual banter to something quiet and cautious. She didn't turn her head. What is it? The annual North American Maritime and Supply Chain Summit starts tomorrow at the Drake Hotel. I know. We're delivering the keynote on automated intermodal dispatch at 10. Cole Enterprises registered their delegation this morning, Liam said gently. Harrison Cole is leading the panel on private equity infrastructure. The name fell into the quiet office like a small, smooth stone dropped into a deep well. Sloan didn't flinch. Her heart didn't race. The phantom ache in her right knee didn't flare up. There was only a calm, vast stillness. It's a commercial conference, Liam, Sloan said, her voice steady and untroubled as she turned her eyes back to her monitors. There are 3,000 attendees. We do our presentation, we secure the Midwest Rail contracts, and we leave. Liam studied her face for a long moment, searching for the ghost of the broken girl he had driven away from New York 8 months ago in the dead of night. He found nothing but steel. All right, Liam smiled softly, picking up his coffee. Let's go show the East Coast how it's done. The grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel was a glittering sea of dark suits, crystal chandeliers, and multi-billion-dollar posturing. Every major player in global logistics, maritime transport, and venture finance was present. At table 1 near the center of the stage, sat the Cole Enterprises delegation. Harrison sat with his back to the grand entrance, a glass of untouched sparkling water in front of him. He was thinner than he had been 8 months ago. The tailored lines of his charcoal Tom Ford suit hung slightly loose over his broad shoulders. His cheekbones were sharper, his jaw shadowed by permanent exhaustion, and faint streaks of silver had begun to show at his temples. He didn't speak to the executives around him. He radiated an aura of cold, untouchable hostility that kept everyone at a 5-foot perimeter. Declan sat beside him, reviewing a briefing packet on the morning's keynote speakers. The first presentation is from Vanguard Logistics, Declan muttered, tapping his pen against the paper. They're the startup that took the Great Lakes shipping concession from under our noses 3 months ago. Their COO is supposed to be an operational prodigy. Harrison didn't look up from his phone. His screen was open to an encrypted private investigator's portal, showing 0 new pings across 48 search grids. Let them have the Great Lakes, Harrison said, his voice flat and lifeless. We're here for the West Coast Rail integration. Ladies and gentlemen, the master of ceremonies announced from the stage. Podium, the sound echoing through the massive ballroom. Please welcome the Chief Operating Officer of Vanguard Logistics, Ms. Sloan Davis. Harrison's entire body went rigid. The phone slipped from his fingers, hitting the linen tablecloth with a dull, heavy thud. The room erupted into polite, rhythmic applause as the lights dimmed slightly, bringing up the massive digital projection screens behind the podium. A woman walked out from the wings. She wore an ivory suit that seemed to glow under the stage spotlights. Her posture was erect, her shoulders back, her stride effortless and completely unhurried. She adjusted the microphone attached to her lapel, looked out over the sea of 3,000 industry titans, and began to speak. Her voice was clear, resonant, and entirely devoid of hesitation. Harrison stood up. He didn't realize he was doing it. His chair scraped loudly against the parquet floor, drawing annoyed glances from the neighboring tables, but he was completely blind to the room. His eyes locked onto her face. Sloan. It was her. The curve of her throat, the way her lips moved when she emphasized a technical term, the faint, familiar gesture of her left hand as she illustrated a supply chain bottleneck on the slide behind her. But it wasn't the Sloan who had lowered her eyes when Audrey insulted her in the bullpen. It wasn't the Sloan who had quietly carried bowls of soup into his office with her head bowed. This woman was an empress. She commanded the room with the casual, devastating brilliance of someone who knew she was the smartest mind in the building. When her presentation concluded 20 minutes later, the ballroom burst into a deafening, enthusiastic standing ovation. Several European port directors were already on their feet, clapping vigorously. Sloan offered a brief, professional nod of appreciation, stepped away from the podium, and walked down the side stairs toward the VIP networking lounge. Harrison moved before the applause had even died down. He shoved past an investment banker, ignored a vice president from Maersk who tried to greet him, and tore through the double doors of the ballroom like a man chasing his own escaping soul. Sloan, he called out into the crowded marble corridor. The hallway was packed with hundreds of attendees milling around espresso stations and corporate booths. She was 20 feet ahead of him, walking beside Liam, who was handing her a notebook. Sloan. Harrison's voice cracked, loud enough that heads began to turn in. Surprise. Sloan stopped. She didn't startle. She didn't freeze. She slowly, gracefully turned around on her heels to face the source of the noise. Harrison broke through the crowd, stopping 5 feet away from her. His chest was heaving, his tie slightly askew, his bloodshot eyes drinking in every single detail of her face with a frantic, starving desperation. Sloan, he whispered, his hands trembling as he reached toward her, his fingers curling in midair, not daring to touch the fine fabric of her sleeve. It's you. God, it's really you. Sloan looked at him. Her expression was a masterclass in polite, corporate neutrality. There was no hatred in her brown eyes. No anger. No lingering sorrow. There was only the chilling, polished courtesy one offered to an unfamiliar vendor in an elevator. Mr. Cole, Sloan said, her voice smooth and level. A pleasure to see Cole Enterprises represented at the summit. I hope you found our dispatch modeling informative. Harrison felt as if someone had driven an ice pick directly between his ribs. He had braced himself for her fury. He had spent 8 months preparing for her. To slap him, to scream at him, to curse his name, to demand that security throw him out onto the street. He had fantasized about her hatred, because hatred at least meant she still felt the heat of what they had shared. This was worse. This was absolute, impenetrable indifference. Sloan, please, Harrison rasped, taking a desperate half-step forward. Don't do this. Don't talk to me like I'm a stranger. We are commercial competitors, Mr. Cole, Sloan replied, glancing down at her watch. And I have a closed-door briefing with the Canadian Port Authority in 7 minutes. If your team wishes to submit an inquiry regarding our software licensing, you may contact our business development desk. I don't want your software. Harrison cried out, completely heedless of the 50 corporate delegates who had stopped in the hallway to gawk at the billionaire CEO unraveling in broad daylight. I want you. Liam stepped forward, placing himself half an inch in front of Sloan, his expression hard as flint. Mr. Cole, step back. You're causing a scene. Harrison's eyes snapped to Liam, a flicker of his old lethal arrogance flaring up before instantly collapsing under the crushing weight of his guilt. Liam, Harrison choked out, his voice dropping into a humiliating, broken plea. Please. Just 5 minutes. Let me talk to her for 5 minutes. Ms. Davis has nothing to say to you, Liam said firmly. It's fine, Liam, Sloan said gently, placing a hand on Liam's forearm. The casual, familiar warmth of her touch on Liam's sleeve struck Harrison like a physical blow. 5 years ago, he had believed that touch was treason. Now he knew it was the simple, pure loyalty of a friend who had protected her while he was plotting her humiliation. Sloane stepped around Liam, looking directly into Harrison's ruined face. Mr. Cole, 5 minutes will not change the fact that our working relationship concluded 8 months ago, she said, her voice calm, clear and perfectly measured. I left everything I owed to Cole Enterprises on your desk. The handover was approved by internal compliance. There is nothing left between us to discuss. You didn't owe me anything. Harrison's voice broke, tears finally spilling over his lashes, tracking down his hollow cheeks in front of 3 dozen of his industry peers. I was the one who owed you. I found the letter, Sloane. I found the escrow ledger. I know what my mother did to you 5 years ago. The hallway went completely silent. Sloane's eyes flickered for a fraction of a second, not with pain but with a faint, weary resignation. Then you know the truth, she said softly. I ruined my mother, Harrison wept, taking another step closer, his hands held out like a beggar pleading for scraps. I stripped her of her assets. I broke the Kensington alliance. I destroyed everything that stood between us. Sloane, I swear to God on my life, I don't care about the company. I don't care about the money. I'll step down tomorrow. I'll move to Chicago. I'll carry your files. I'll manage your schedule. I'll do whatever you want. Just please, look at me, like you used to. The executives in the hallway stared in stunned disbelief. Harrison Cole, the ruthless corporate raider who had forced 3 international shipping syndicates into bankruptcy without blinking, was weeping in the corridor of the Drake Hotel, offering to throw away an $8 billion empire just to carry a woman's briefcase. Sloane looked at him. She saw the tears. She saw the expensive suit ruined by neglect. She saw the raw, agonizing repentance that would have once made her weep with relief. And she felt nothing. Harrison, she said, using his first name for the first time in 8 months. Hope flared in his wet eyes like a dying candle catching a gust of air. Yes, Sloane. 5 years ago, I gave up my happiness so you could build your empire, she said, her voice dropping to a quiet, crystalline whisper that only he could hear. And 8 months ago, when you had everything in the world, you decided that my love was worth $250,000 and a silver key to a backroom apartment. Harrison flinched as if she had struck him across the mouth. You didn't destroy us because of your mother, Harrison, Sloane continued, her gaze unwavering, cold and absolute. You destroyed us because your ego was too fragile to believe that a woman could love you for who you were, rather than what you could buy her. She took a slow, deliberate step back, pulling her coat tighter around herself. I spent 5 years mourning the man you used to be in that Brooklyn studio. Sloane said softly, I don't need to mourn him anymore. Because that man died. The day you decided love was something you could purchase on an installment plan. She turned on her heel. Liam, let's go. We have a meeting. The fallout from the Chicago summit was swift, brutal, and thoroughly publicized. Across the financial pages of the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg, photographs of Harrison Cole breaking down in the hallway of the Drake Hotel leaked to the press within 2 hours. By morning, the board of Cole Enterprises was in an emergency closed-door session, while the stock price dipped 4% on rumors of executive instability. Harrison didn't attend the board meeting. He remained in Chicago, checking into an anonymous hotel 3 blocks from Vanguard Logistics headquarters on Wacker Drive. He spent his days sitting in the lobby coffee shop across the street, watching Sloane arrive at 7:30 a.m. every morning, holding her briefcase, laughing with her team, stepping into the glass elevator like a sun that had long since moved out of his orbit. He didn't approach her. He didn't send flowers. He didn't use his corporate weight to pressure her clients. He had finally learned the most brutal rule of all. His money was entirely worthless to the only person whose forgiveness he required. On Friday afternoon, the glass doors of the coffee shop swung open with a violent clatter. Audrey Kensington marched in, wearing a trench coat, her designer sunglasses pushed up onto her head, her face pale, pinched, and manic with desperation. She spotted Harrison sitting in the corner booth and stormed over, slamming her leather handbag onto the small round table. So this is where you've been hiding? Audrey shrieked, her voice drawing the attention of half the cafe. My father's firm filed for Chapter 11 reorganization this morning. The banks called our notes because Cole Enterprises refused to roll over the secondary credit facility. Harrison didn't look up from his lukewarm black coffee. Your father used non-public corporate data to short our shipping contracts last quarter. The SEC was going to seize his assets regardless. I simply accelerated the filing. You did it for her. Audrey hissed, her manicured fingers clawing at the edge of the table. You destroyed 3 generations of my family's social standing. For an administrative girl who won't even look you in the eye. She leaned in close, her teeth clenched and vicious, spitting hatred. I went to her office this morning, Harrison. I went up to the 42nd floor of that cheap glass tower. I told her everything. I told her you were a monster who used people until they broke. I told her that if she ever took you back, she would be the biggest fool in Manhattan. Harrison's head snapped up. His eyes, dark, hollowed out, and terrifyingly cold, locked onto Audrey's face. The air around the booth seemed to drop 20 degrees. What did you say to her? Harrison whispered. Audrey smirked, thinking she had finally found a nerve. I told her the truth. I told her you were an insecure, paranoid coward who spent 5 years obsessing over a woman who traded him for a ride in a Mercedes. Harrison slowly reached out, grabbed his phone from the table and tapped a single contact. Declan, Harrison said into the receiver, his voice chillingly calm. Release. The forensic audit regarding the Kensington family's offshore tax shelters to the Southern District of New York. Yes, right now. All 6 volumes. Audrey's smirk vanished. The color drained from her skin so fast she looked like a corpse. Harrison, no. That carries criminal liability. My father would go to prison. Then he should pick a comfortable cell, Harrison said, hanging up the phone and sliding it back into his pocket. He looked at Audrey with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. Do you know what Sloane told you when you went up to her office? Harrison asked quietly. Audrey swallowed hard, her throat clicking in terror. She didn't call security, Harrison murmured, his voice cracking with a bitter, heartbroken pride. She didn't scream at you. She offered you a cup of tea, told you that your family's financial collapse was a civil matter between your lawyers and coal enterprises, and asked her assistant to validate your parking. He stood up, towering over her, his shadow cold and unforgiving. She is 10 times the human being you or I will ever be, Harrison said. Now, get out of this city before I have the Port Authority revoke your personal pilot's license. Audrey stumbled back, clutched her purse to her chest, and fled into the rain, sobbing in hysterical, ruined terror. The rain in Chicago had turned into a steady, freezing downpour by 8 p.m. Sloane walked out of the Apex Tower lobby, her trench coat buttoned up to her chin, holding a large black umbrella against the gusting lake wind. The sidewalk was mostly deserted. The street lamps cast long, yellow halos across the slick, black asphalt. She walked half a block toward the underground parking entrance when she saw a silhouette standing near the concrete pillar. Harrison. He had no umbrella. He wore no overcoat, only a dark gray dress shirt soaked through with freezing water, clinging to his shivering shoulders. His hair was plastered to his face, his lips tinted faintly blue from the cold. He had been standing in the rain for 3 hours. Sloane stopped 5 paces away, her umbrella held steady against the wind. You're going to catch pneumonia, Mr. Cole, she said calmly. Harrison looked up through the rain. His teeth were chattering, his hands trembling violently at his sides. But when he saw her, a faint, agonizingly tender smile touched the corners of his lips. You always said I had a weak immune system when I didn't sleep, he whispered, his voice shaking with the cold. That was 5 years ago, Sloane replied. Go back to your hotel. I can't, Harrison choked out, taking a single, unsteady step toward her, then stopping, respecting the 5-foot boundary she had established. If I go back to that hotel, I have to look at the ceiling. And every time I look at the ceiling, I remember that you spent 5 years protecting my life while I spent 5 years planning to humiliate yours. He slowly reached into his soaked pocket and pulled out a small, wet velvet box. With trembling, clumsy fingers, he popped the brass latch open. Inside, resting on the damp velvet, were the 2 custom-engraved silver cufflinks, S&H. You made these for me, Harrison wept, hot tears mixing with the freezing rain streaming down his face. You spent your own money. You remembered the anniversary of the day we moved into that terrible Brooklyn apartment with the broken radiator. Sloane looked at the small silver squares. A sharp, phantom tug pulled at the center of her chest, not enough to break her stride, but enough to remind her of the girl who had once loved a boy with holes in his sneakers. I did, Sloane said softly, because back then, I believed that even if we had nothing, we had the truth. I have the truth now, Sloane. Harrison cried, dropping heavily onto his knees. Right there on the wet concrete, the freezing puddle soaking through his dress trousers, completely uncaring that he was kneeling in the dirt like a beggar at her feet. I know everything. I know you loved me. I know you never wanted the money. He held the box up toward her with both hands, his body shaking uncontrollably. Take it back, he begged, his voice tearing into raw, ragged shreds. Take the cufflinks back. Take the necklace. Take my company. Take everything I own. Sloane. Strip me down until I have nothing left, just like I was in Brooklyn. Let me start over from zero. Let me apply for a job at your firm. I'll make your coffee, I'll clean your office, I'll wait in the rain for 10 years if that's what it takes. Sloane looked down at the billionaire kneeling in the freezing mud. The wind howled between the skyscrapers, whipping the rain against the fabric of her umbrella. She walked forward 2 steps. Harrison's breath caught in his throat, a wild, desperate flare of hope, exploding in his bloodshot eyes as he looked up at her. Sloane reached out, took the small velvet box from his wet hands, and closed the lid with a soft, definitive click. She didn't put it in her pocket. She gently placed the box onto the dry concrete ledge of the building's exterior, planter beside him. Keep them, Harrison, Sloane said, her voice dropping into a register of quiet, devastating finality. Let them remind you of what happens when you treat human hearts like corporate takeovers. Harrison's hands fell limply into the freezing puddle. Sloane, please, he sobbed, his forehead dropping down until it pressed against the wet concrete between his knees, his broad shoulders shaking with an agony that tore his soul into ribbons. Don't leave me in the dark. Please don't. Leave me alone. Sloane looked down at his bowed head for 3 long seconds. You're not in the dark, Harrison, she said softly, turning her umbrella toward the parking garage entrance. You have your $8 billion empire. You have your board seats. You have everything you ever wanted. She stepped past him, her heels clicking cleanly against the pavement. You just don't have me. 16 months later, the summer sun over Lake Michigan blazed in a brilliant, sapphire blue sky, reflecting off the glass facades of Wacker Drive in dazzling sheets of gold. On the 65th floor of the newly expanded Vanguard Global Headquarters, a private ribbon-cutting ceremony was underway. The room was filled with municipal leaders, international maritime partners, and the entire junior staff of the operations division, all holding champagne, flutes, laughing as the flashbulbs of the local business press lit up the ribbon. Liam walked over to Sloane, holding 2 glasses of sparkling cider. The European intermodal expansion just cleared the regulatory board in Brussels, Liam grinned, handing her a flute. We officially own 40% of the North American Rotterdam digital shipping corridor. Sloane smiled, clinking her glass against his with a clear, musical ping. A good day's work, Mr. Pierce. A phenomenal day's work, Ms. Davis. Liam leaned against the floor-to-ceiling glass, looking out over the glittering expanse of the city below. By the way, an anonymous trust transferred the commercial lease for the Brooklyn Maritime Terminal to our logistics subsidiary this morning, at a 90% discount on the market rate. Sloane paused, her glass halfway to her lips. The Brooklyn Terminal? The one on the East River, Liam said softly. The trust's paperwork was signed by Declan Pierce's legal group, but the controlling beneficiary was listed under a single initial, H. Sloane turned her gaze toward the window. In the far distance, across the wide expanse of the blue water, the horizon stretched out clean, endless, and entirely open. She had heard about Harrison over the past year through industry trade publications. He had resigned as CEO of Coal Enterprises, transitioning the firm into a non-voting public trust managed by an independent board. He had stepped away from the Manhattan social circuits, moving his primary office to a modest research lab in upstate New York, focusing entirely on open-source logistics software for small agricultural producers. He had never called her again. He had never sent another gift to her office. Had never appeared on her street. He had honored her boundary with the quiet, devastating obedience of a man who had finally understood that real love does not demand, does not possess, and does not negotiate. He was living in the light he had built, while letting her live in hers. What do you want to do with the lease? Liam asked gently. Sloane looked down at the sparkling amber liquid in her glass, then back out at the wide sunlit sky. Accept the commercial rate, Sloane said calmly, her voice filled with an unshakable, luminous peace. Send the standard corporate contract to his legal team, and ensure our accounting department pays the full market value. Liam smiled, raising his glass once more. Fair business, Ms. Davis. Always, Sloane replied, the corners of her lips curving into a genuine, radiant smile that belonged entirely to herself. She took a slow sip of the cider, turned her back on the past, and walked toward the bright, noisy room of people waiting for her to lead them into the future.